everyone. Welcome to the Neos Educator stream. My name is Subjectivity, and I'm your host today. I'd like to welcome everyone live here in our auditorium, as well as those watching on our Twitch stream. There will be live Q&A after the presentation. Last year, in our series of How We Made It talks, we had the pleasure of hosting several groups of Metaverse Maker Competition winners. As many of you know, the Metaverse Makers Competition is a contest in which creators are challenged to make something, be it a world, an asset, an avatar, etc., in the short time of 1 month. This year, there were a number of wonderful creations, and we hope to have several speakers in the coming weeks. These talks allow for award-winning teams to explain to our viewers literally how they made it, how and why they created the fascinating projects that were recognized by both judges and the Neos community. Today, I have the immense pleasure of welcoming our first set of speakers from Team Vibez. This year at MMC23, Team Vibez won Best Social World by a large team for their project, Deep Dreams. Deep Dreams is a fantastic world full of incredible things. Sea creatures, innovative sound design, and my personal favorite, a swim-up bar. Of course, it also has this very relaxing aesthetic that Vibez is kind of known for. So, without further ado, please welcome to the Neos Educator stage, Zizzle, Mars, and Electrospy. I believe Zizzle will start the presentation with an explanation of the creation of the world's aquatic touch tank, correct?
Yep, that's the plan. Thanks very much for the introduction. Okay, so to start off, can everyone hear me reasonably well in this normal talking mode, or shall I go into shout? Yeah? You can hear me? Okay, brilliant. Okay, yeah, so as we mentioned, it's really great, and thanks to Jason as well, who sort of tried to put the whole series together. The world was a marathon. It took us, we had a whole month to do it, and we really used that whole month. We started on the very first hour of the competition, and then we went right up until the last minute. It was a little stressful, but we got there in the end. As Subjectivity mentioned, inside the world, we've got some systems. We've got a sort of aquarium room indoors, and we've got a pool area outside. I'm going to be talking a bit about how we designed and built and put together the interactive aquarium bit. But before, we're showing things mostly off in here, but before we do that, I'd like to actually do a quick trip to the world so that anyone who hasn't seen it already can see it in context, because things obviously look a little bit different in here. So I think the plan is that we will all hop over to that world. We'll show that off. We'll look at it for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back in here, and I'll do a little bit of a run through of how it came to be. So I think everyone has probably preloaded the world. So if you can all swap over now to that copy of Deep Dreams, and we'll see you there. While we're loading, I just wanted to really point out, well, today we're going to be having Electrospy, Mars and I talking a bit about some of the functionality bits of the world, and the world up later. The world really was a massive team effort from everybody. We have an amazing team of people we've built up over the years. We've all become very good friends. We've got a couple of people who are modelers, a couple of people who do all sorts of things. We've got some programmers and everything in between, and it's a real pleasure to work with everyone. So the thing is billed as Team Vibez, but just want to make sure everyone is well aware that it's not just Mars, Electro, and I. There's a whole bunch of us as well, all of whom contributed fantastically to it. Hi?
You might want to go and shout in this world because the voice distance isn't as good.
Good point, thank you, yeah. Is that a bit better now? Yeah, okay. Lovely. Have we got everyone who was... Oh, you don't hear any different? Yeah, okay, we might have overridden it. I'll just go into broadcast, that's probably better. Okay, there you go. Sorry, I'm in all of your heads now. Okay, do we think we have everyone through? I think I recognize pretty much all the names. Yeah, we've got everyone. Okay, lovely. If you'd like to follow me down the stairs, we'll be time for a proper world tour later, so we're not going to stop and see all the sites. We're just going to look at one room in particular. So if you'd like to come down here with me. And
the steps are great.
Yeah, that was something that Beamed made for us.
Excellent.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to be mostly talking about the creatures and systems that we set up in here in the Blacklight Aquarium. As you can see, we've got some lovely jellyfish, and the rays and the axolotls in here were all modeled out by Mook during the month. Yeah, so the systems I'll be talking about is basically how we came from an empty tank, actually an empty world, and then into having these lovely little axolotls, rays, which you can interact with. So if you try popping your hand in the water nearby, they will come up to you. But be gentle, because you might frighten them if you hit it too hard. There you go. Mars just sent it away. There you go. And the axolotls will do a little... apparently axolotls really do this little bark when they come to the water surface. I struggle to believe it's real because it's just too cute, but we decided to implement it in here anyway. Okay, so as you can see, I just wanted everyone to have an idea of what the world is in context, to see where we got to, before we go right back to the beginning. Cool, okay. I think let's pop back to the Idioscience world. I'll see you all there. As you'll see, I brought a copy of the touch tank in here because it's a little bit nicer to talk around an example of the thing that we're dealing with. And we really got moving very, very quickly in this world. I think by about day 2 or 3, much of the interior geometry was already blocked out by Hidi. She modeled things incredibly fast, which made our life a lot easier because it's much easier to then see how the space is going to work, what you're going to have. And by about day 5, we had this tank modeled, but there was nothing in it. And we knew that we wanted this to be a touch tank, and so we wanted it to be interactive and that people would go through things. Now, I've been to several aquariums over my life. I really like them, but I have not had all that much experience with touch tanks. So, of course, the first thing to do is to look for references to get some inspiration to figure out, how things should probably look in the world. So we're going to take a quick look at a YouTube video that I found that basically gave me the idea of roughly how it should work in the world.
Sharks and rays often get a bad rap in the news. We've got the Jaws movie, Steve Irwin. It's great to get people in here to show them that there are different species that aren't aggressive and that you can touch them and that they're actually really gentle creatures.
I'm just going to mute the video and talk over it. So one of the things that I was looking at when I'm looking at this is one of the problems we need to solve is how should the creatures navigate around the world, or around the tank? And looking at this, I'm seeing that in general, they seem to mostly do a kind of circulating motion around the larger channels in the tank. Also thinking about the actual animation of the animals themselves, the rays have a relatively simple flapping motion. Whereas the sharks, of course, any fish will be wanting to have more of a side-to-side swimming motion like that. And then thinking about the interactivity, how these things work, basically it's primarily people dipping their hands in. And now if I unmute it, oh, no, the video's over. Anyway, what you probably noticed is there's a lot of kids screaming. Now, in Neos worlds, we tend not to have that, but I thought that it might be interesting to look into having the animals react a bit to how people approach the tank. So if you put your hand in gently, then maybe things would come up to you, whereas if you put your hand in too forcefully, that might startle them. So these were already ideas that I had percolating around early on. So if we hide the screen, hide the screen and bring back the tank. So we knew we wanted to fill the tank, but the question was, how should we handle the pathing of animals around it? For anyone who remembers the Rocky Retreat world that we made back in 2021, I put together a swimming fish system there where we had koi fish, but the motion there was mostly a kind of a point-to-point thing. The fish would swim to a point, stay there a little bit, and then find a new target and swim away. And that wasn't really the kind of motion that I wanted for this world. So instead, took a lot of inspiration from something that Electro and Mars had made in the past, which is we call it a traffic system. And this was a system for setting out a network of waypoints around the world that then agents could move around around the world. So that then gave rise to essentially the first placeholder, or the first sense of how things might look. And these were fish, which I think they come from a free asset pack online. And you can see the pathing is quite nice, but it wasn't really the sort of pathing that I wanted, because if you remember, I wanted them mostly to be circulating around the tank. And these ones are tending to sort of move somewhat randomly. The speed isn't very even, and they sort of zigzag around. Just to show you that the waypoints look like, you can now see the network of points that the fish are moving around. And because of this little tooltip that Mars and Electro made previously, it makes it extremely easy to set these networks up and to move them around. So it seemed like the ideal kind of tool for me to rapidly prototype and then improve on the design that we wanted for these fish. But as I mentioned, these were not really the type of fish we were looking for. We were looking I like the idea of including some rays. They seem to be very popular in touch tanks. And early on in the process, Mook modeled some axolotls for us. If anyone's not familiar with those, they are little salamanders, amphibians, which don't quite grow out of their juvenile stage. So they still look quite cute and small. So that's what we wanted. So if I hide these, what I did then was I took this tooltip. Let me decrypt it. This tooltip that Mars and Electro had made, and I stripped out most of the logic, much of it, and I mostly just kept the ability to create a network of waypoints. Then, because when you're building a project like Deep Dreams, you don't always have perfect synchronization between when the modelers have assets ready and when the programmers are ready to bring them to life. So what I did was, along the way, I produced a very basic placeholder ray. You can see it swimming around. If you want to get up from the chairs and take a look, if that's easier, then please feel free to do so. And you can see this is a very simple little placeholder ray. One of the cool things about Neos is that we can, even someone with very little artistic talent, I can very quickly knock together something out of a few triangles, a box, and a few capsules for the tail. And having a system like this is useful because, again, it allows you to very rapidly put together a prototype system and get a sense for how you want things to work. And this aspect, the idea of having the waypoints and the fish swimming around, this pretty much solved the larger scale navigation question of how I wanted things to work. But then going from this, you can see this ray has a very simple flapping animation, and ideally we'd like to do a bit better than that. So while Mook was modeling the ray for us, what I went to do is I then went to get a bit more inspiration and references on what it actually looks like when rays are swimming. Now, you saw previously in the video, they'd had a species of ray which has very triangular looking fins, and it has a motion a bit like this. But the rays that Mook modeled for us, which you'll see in a second, are actually a bit more like stingrays. So if we take another look at the screen, let's see, pull the screen up, and then we'll take a quick look at a video with some stingrays to see how they move. And what you'll notice is they're not doing a perfect flapping up and down motion. You'll notice there's a bit of an extra ripple to the wings as they float along. And that was something I wanted to try to capture. There you go. You see the leading edge comes down and then it ripples along the side rather than just going up and down. And then thinking now about the sort of smaller scale animation of the fish, this is something I wanted to capture in that while they're navigating around the tank. Okay, so let's turn that one off. Okay. Oh. Okay, so this is still the placeholder ray. Let's take a look at the stingray that Mook modeled for us. This is the one here. I'll take it over and, well, let me just scale it up a bit. There you go, we're in VR. We don't have to be constrained by scale. And I'll show it side on like that. And what I'll do is I will turn on the visuals. Okay, so what you can see now is a visual depiction of how the bone structure of the model looks. If I turn it on its side, you can see it a bit more. It looks slightly unnervingly like a head crab from Half-Life, or maybe one of the facehuggers from Alien, like this, which, yeah. So I won't leave that view on for too long. But what you will notice is that we have enough bones. It's really important that the kind of fake skeleton of the model has enough bone points to be able to support that kind of rippling motion for the rays. So being able to communicate this as as a programmer knowing what I wanted, and then being able to communicate to the modelers, is really useful that everyone knows a little bit of everything about computer graphics and 3D creation in Neos in order for that kind of partnership to work out well. All right, so let me get rid of that slightly disturbing visualization. Turn on the side. Another thing that Mook did, which was a really nice touch, is she made it possible for the eyes to blink, which I can turn that on there. You can probably see that. And it's a very, very cute effect. And this will come back later. So this was really nice. So in the way that Mook did the modeling, she enabled the really nice flapping animation as a possibility. And she gave us this extra little highlight thing that we can use when the rays get close to people. Okay, let me turn that off. I'll put this back over here.
She's only missing one thing.
What's that?
A big bow.
Oh, that would be very cute, yeah. Maybe a little bit too much for underwater, though. Right, okay, let me turn off this placeholder ray. So once we got the rays in, there we go. You can see we've got some, these are now the real ways. And if you come in and take a look. It's all right. If you want to come up a bit closer, you can if you take a look at the rays, the way the wings go, we've got a kind of a subtle rippling motion to the wings. It's not too gross. Actually, the first prototype that we had, the rings were like really rippling really hard. But I felt that something a little bit subtler was better. Let's turn off that. Okay. So this is great. We've got one of the types of things. They're navigating around the thing, and we've got the animations in as well. This is great. This is really useful. And it's worth, again, thinking about the interplay between people putting in functionality and people doing the models. It's really motivating for a programmer to, it's fine to put in the placeholder things, and you can get so far with that. But then when someone really brings in the model and you can start working on that in the world, it really boosts the motivation. So having this kind of back and forth between modelers and artists and programmers, functionality people is really nice. Okay, so we've got the rays, but as you saw previously, there were a number of different species in the touch tank. And what I had in mind was that I wanted to have a few different species which had different types of interactivity. So the rays are nice. You can put your hand in and they will come up to you if they see you. There you go. But I wanted something which would be have a slightly different character. And one of the ideas that we played with was a pufferfish. Now, this one is quite small, and it is probably around the corner over here. If anyone can see it, point it out for me. Is it around? Oh, yeah, here it is. So we've got a small little pufferfish over here. You probably want to all come up and see this one, because it really is pretty small. And the idea was, okay, we've got a pufferfish and we've got the rays. How can we make it feel different so that they feel like different species, and not just that I took one kind of movement animation template and copied it over from multiple species? So what I wanted to do, once I knew that I wanted to have this to startle them, the rays, if you tap the water, then they will start flapping away quite rapidly. But the pufferfish, I wanted to do something a little different. Let's see if I can. All right, so if you watch the puffer, I will now startle it. And the idea was that it would sort of we wanted to depart a little bit from it being very realistic, and I wanted it to feel more kind of comedic, where you tap the water and the thing would start floating around, helplessly flapping around and looking a bit silly. Hopefully not too traumatized by the experience. So let me just startle. Yeah. Let me startle that again, in case anyone missed it. And the idea was that it would just sort of be rolling around. Now, unfortunately, this was one thing which ended up being cut from the final product, because there were some difficulties actually getting the modeling to look really, really nice with that effect. And also, we were filling up this touch tank. As you'll see in the world later, there was another whole big tank of fish that needed doing as well. So in the end, the pufferfish didn't make it into the final iteration. We're hoping to put those in another one. But another species did make it in, as you noticed earlier, which is the axolotls. Now, I have no idea if axolotls would normally live in the same tank as rays. Probably not. Axolotls, I think, maybe live in the canals around Mexico City, I believe, natively. Rays, not sure if you find them there. But this is VR. It doesn't have to make sense, or at least it doesn't have to perfectly make sense. So we can introduce these different species together. Again, Mook did a great model for us. Let me show that off. So we got this little axolotl prop. Make it a bit bigger. Can I grab it? There we go. Okay, let's put it in the middle for you. And again, this is, as you can see, a model with bones. And there you go, I can show you there. So all of the different parts that we wanted animated, so the gills, which can wiggle, as well as having the whole body with bones in it, and the tail, it's really important to have that, so that can support the animation, the swimming animation that we wanted to do. Okay, so let me hide the bones. Again, made some lovely little touches to these, so the eyes can blink very cutely. And as you saw in the world, probably the mouth can also open and close. And these little touches are really nice because they come in really handy when I'm programming the finer details of the interaction between the user and the agent or the animal that comes up to you. Is you can use these little details to make it to enhance the experience. Right, so let's turn off the mouth, and I will put our friend over here. Thank you very much. Cool. So the question then was, axolotl, I can use pretty much the same navigation system using the waypoints that the rays are using, but then the question was how to actually animate the individual axolotl. Now, unfortunately, the axolotl, let's watch a video. We have a little one. Let me pull up the screen. Okay, and let's get the axolotl video. Okay, so this is, of course, not an axolotl swimming around in its native environment, but it was in a tank, and it served as quite a useful reference for me to see what they looked like in motion. And so looking at it, you'll notice that the gills, as they're moving, the gills flap around and kind of get pushed back to the side of the body as they're swimming. So that was definitely an effect we wanted to capture. And you'll notice now, as it prepares to swim, it tucks its legs in to the side. So it doesn't swim with its legs sort of splayed out as if it's standing. So that was something we needed to do, was to get the animated transition between the legs in its kind of standing pose and then the legs in the swimming pose. And then finally, it's worth noting that if you look at the tail is much more dynamic than the rest of the body. So we needed to tune the kind of wiggly bits of the animal to capture that part of the animation as well. What I also wanted to do, and I'll show you in a second how it utterly failed, was to get this kind of paddling motion that the axolotl does sometimes, because they seem to, when they're doing a big swim, they will tuck everything in and swim along. Whereas when they stop and do a paddling motion, they usually use that when they're turning a corner. And I wanted to try to capture that. But as you'll see in a moment, unfortunately, I'm not the most competent of animators, and Neos's support for animations is not, I would say, world-class yet. Let me show you what happened when I tried to animate these things. Turn that off, and we got this back. I will turn off the pufferfish and the rays for now, and I will show you the bad axolotl. So here, it's not actually in the water, but if you come a bit closer, you'll be able to see how terrible this animation I made is. So the idea was that it would swim towards a waypoint and then paddle a bit around to change direction and then start swimming again. And I mean, I don't know what your feelings are on this one, but I felt that it was really, really, really bad. And that to be clear, I was the one who put this in. I'm not critiquing anyone else's work. And I decided that I wasn't happy with that. So in order to have the axolotl behavior feel different to the rays, and at the time, we plan to have the pufferfish feel different to that as well, I needed to come up with a different behavior for the axolotls that would feel nice. And this is where an extra obstacle that we have in the tank came in. So early on, I decided that it probably didn't make sense to have, or at least it would help to fill the space if we had a rock or something in the middle. And early on, we didn't have that modeled, but having a placeholder rock was good enough for me to plan out the rough network of points that I wanted all of the creatures to be following. Then later on, we got a much nicer final rock in there. And this is the one that I planned the axolotl behavior around. So I had originally also thought about the rays having a resting behavior. But when I tried that, they ended up just sort of sitting on the bottom and looking very lifeless. And I didn't really like how that worked. But I decided to bring back this idea of resting things for the axolotls instead. So if I show you what the axolotls look like in the final version, you'll see that they swim around. They have this kind of wiggling motion by the side. But also sometimes, if you want to come a bit closer, you can see that they will also occasionally stop and rest. There are a few rest points around where they will go down, their gills will just subtly flutter, and they will close their eyes. And the idea was then that this behavior would feel very different to the rays to somewhat obscure the fact that they're using the same navigation behavior under the hood. Okay. So one of the final touches, of course, is that we don't really have anything in this tank, and you wanted to make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more livable for the creatures. So our modelers, Princess and Lasagna, put together a whole bunch of lovely ornaments and decorations for the tank. We didn't want to go too overboard because we wanted the focus to still be the creatures, but we wanted to add some extra ones. And now here in the last few minutes before I finish up, I just wanted to highlight some of the kind of finer touches in the details. So what you will notice is, let me turn the rays on because I'm going to see. You'll notice that when the animals collide with some of these, the floating seaweed, it actually knocks it aside. And the way we're doing that is we've got some dynamic bones on the seaweed, and we've got dynamic bone colliders on the actual animals as well. And we've specifically made the seaweed colliders aware of the ones on the animal, so that when the animals swim past and hit the seaweed, it gives this relatively nice natural looking knocking things aside effect. Now, if we didn't have that, then the animals would just be clipping through things, which for me is quite a big immersion breaker in VR. And so we wanted to kind of flip that on its head and turn it into a nice asset to increase people's immersion and sense that this was a real system. Okay, let me think. What other things? Oh yeah. So on that note of talking about clipping, one of the reasons we don't have this tank being super full of creatures was to try to reduce the likelihood that you would see them clipping into each other, so basically colliding with each other, and thereby breaking the immersion that these are real creatures. So we actually have a collision avoidance system on them, and I will turn that on now. And there you go. In fact, you saw that with the rays there. One of the rays, when the ray from behind detected that it was getting close to the ray in front, the ray in front got a little speed up, and the ray behind got a slight slowdown. And the idea is that this should help to prevent immersion-breaking collisions between the animals. Now, of course, there are situations when you can't avoid it, but this was a relatively simple touch, which avoids probably the majority of collisions between them. The other thing was, as I mentioned, when you tap on the surface of the water, you can hear the audio, but it also alerts any of the animals nearby that there's something interesting, and they go into a different behavior state where they will swim towards the surface and look. So if I turn on the water contacts, there you go. See, you saw the axolotls also do a bit of a collision avoidance there as well. So if I tap the water surface gently, you'll see that a big sphere appears. like that. And this is indicating the sort of zone of influence. If there was anything inside that and it was looking roughly in my direction, then it would be able to come up to me. They're coming around the corner. Let me try and track that one to me. So there we go. If I do that, there you go. So you can see the ray is now coming towards me. And I think it then should swim on. There we go. And there you go. You saw the collision avoidance system activating again. But if I hit the water too hard, you'll see this big red sphere comes up, and this now startles the rays, and it causes them to move away. And this was something that I wanted to use to increase people's immersion and to reward the people who came up to this and treated this as if it were a real object. Because typically, if you come to a touch tank, unless you're a violent kid, you're not going to be slamming your hand into the water to attract the animals. So I wanted to have a relatively nice behavior there. Okay. I think that is most of what I wanted to show off for this. When we do the world tour, you're more than welcome to ask me any questions about how the actual underlying system works, or indeed after I'm done with the presentation. Mm-hmm. But I want to hand over a little bit now to Electrospy and Mars Manchi, who, well, really put together the system that allows for this water tapping audio and water tapping events to happen. So I'm going to hide the touch tank for now. And shall I bring back the stage, guys?
Yeah, I would say so.
Come on up,
bring back the
guys.
stage.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to make sure I'm not standing in it when it appears.
Yes, I should move it too.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so we've got the stage.
Nice.
So yeah, Mars and Electro, do you want to talk now a bit about the kind of audio and contact-based touch technology that we perfected in Deep Dreams, but has long roots stretching back quite a way, right?
It has quite the history, yes.
Yeah, it has such a history. Obviously, we didn't use the really old system from back then because we still wanted to keep it in the spirit of the MMC, actually making things from the ground up, making it usable and self-competition. But we're going to bring up one of the very first prototypes from, at this point, over 2 years ago, which started this whole endeavor of making collision interaction things. The original idea back then was making a breakable window. But as you can already see, this is not really reliable. And one of the things, we also saw back then is this was way too heavy. Having one window and all, but yeah, there's also no positional audio. The in-between frame tracking was really inaccurate. So sometimes you would get like itching in between the frames. It would just trigger just by passing it, but just gently touching it. So it was not really reliable, but it was fun to mess around with. But at that point, not usable. So we came up with a little bit more creative idea later down the line and brought up Gen 2. Some people might already have seen this out in the wild, sometimes been distributed. The main difference here is this one is not using colliders. Instead, it's using like these tracking spheres. And it's actually checking the distance between the dots. And if you get close enough, then it triggers the sound. It's also speed reliant, so if you go harder, it gets louder.
The dots are local, so they won't show up on camera.
Yeah. So there's also the first system which introduced for interaction for full body tracking. So if you would keep break and grab your feet and just go like this, you can now also kick the thing, which I guess was a good and a bad decision at the same time. Because now people started to put it up onto the mirrors in their worlds, and you could just constantly see them kicking the thing, bashing their head into that. Colliders, gonna love them.
Yeah, I find it amazing how as soon as you put, as Probable Prime called it, donkable glass into a world, just the first thing everyone wants to do is to smash their head into it. I love how this is not an interaction anyone would ever do. Well, I assume most people wouldn't do in real life, but as soon as you put people in VR, they start behaving in totally different ways. It's quite an interesting thing to observe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the system you're showing off here, again, like the performance of this does not scale particularly well if you're having it in worlds. And I think this was the version we had in our MMC Metaverse Maker Competition, 2021 world, which we used for doing splashing audio in the river. And then the year after in Lotus Bay, we kind of had a breakthrough. Right?
Yeah. We had a breakthrough. Thanks to Frooks adding another small little thing. Which, does it show up? No, it doesn't show up. Come on. Mars, do you got the prototype?
Oh no.
I'm not sure the audio is coming through on the stream, but I assure everybody there is breaking glass happening. We're not totally crazy.
Okay.
I'm actually currently baffled why it's not showing the search then. So,
Well, it's easy enough to set up. So
exactly.
might as well show that.
Want to do that?
Yeah. While you talk about it, I'll just set one up.
So one of the major differences with this system is we did actually go back to it being collider based instead of just tracking points, which constantly need to be updated every single frame. But this one not really uses the native physics colliders. Instead, in the meantime, Fuchs added something nice for things like haptic vests for interactions with that. So you could actually feel tension of that. And we did take a look at the tech under the hood and we're like, wait a second. This is still collider based, but it's not running on the physical layer. It's running on the haptics layer, which is completely unobscured by the main process, which means it was really efficient. So we did a little bit of prototyping, and after a lot of tinkering and figuring out what things we need to do there, we got it to work. And we spawned a bunch of these test cubes around the world just to see how it was impacting performance, and there was almost virtual no impact at all. You just have the one-time initial loading for 1 second or so there, but after that, it just runs in the background, is not affecting anyone anymore. And since most of the logic is just locally running on yourself, on the avatar, no one else is also affected by that. But since you're sending an impulse if you're colliding,
almost.
Almost.
Well, Electra, do you want to show the tracking colliders or the tracking points?
Oh yeah.
I can't.
Oh, what? Your hands are out in space for some reason.
There we go.
That's interesting.
Okay.
Let's go with Mars
now. So when to track the user in the haptics layer, we have to parent our own spheres to the avatar, which you can see with these spheres. They have trigger colliders on the haptics layer, which is completely separate from the normal one, as Electro explained. And as soon as this sphere touches any other collider that is correctly set up with the audio interaction, which is very simple to do, I just did it in 2 minutes, it works. So now as soon as I hit an object, the sound gets...
it plays.
It plays.
And to emphasize, these are extremely spammable. Like, you can put these all over the place in your world, and performance-wise, it's totally fine. We had tons of them all over the place in Lotus Bay, our world last year. We've got them all over the glass. We've got them in the pool. There are many more places we plan to add them in in Deep Dreams as well. So if you're using any older contact audio systems, talk to us and just make sure that you're using these ones, because if you're not using these ones, you may well see a significant performance boost. One
other very nice thing about these colliders is that they still have support for mesh colliders for triggers. So instead of only being limited to the primitive colliders like boxes or spheres, you can actually have like the entire world mesh be one collider, and then any part you hit on the world mesh works with like, for example, the glass hit or the water.
So there's no need.
Gives you more freedom for what is actually interactable.
It's way more helpful instead of having a bunch of boxes just making like a round shape. If it's like a hollow interior or just having some walls there, you just take the mesh, set it up, put two things on it, and it works.
So apparently the audio is quite low. The volume is really low. So maybe if we, I can tell you what. Let's just take the box into the audience. Here you go. We can do an audience interactivity bit. Come on, everyone. Come on. If you don't believe us, come and smack the box. There you go. Give it a good hit. Yep. Smack your head into it. Kick it. Punch it. Enjoy abusing the box. Yeah, these are good as a replacement for stress balls. We haven't really figured those out in VR yet, but these kind of do the trick.
Well, we know the sound good.
Yep. Okay. So I'm glad that everyone now believes this, that the sound does indeed work. Cool.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to playing audio, we get a couple of bits of information about the contact, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we still have some of the old features from the previous version of this, which is where you're hitting the thing and how fast you're going. But thanks to the small changes Zyval did to that, we can also now trigger another action with this action. And in the case of the touch tank, if you bang in the water, as we have seen, you can now trigger the system for the fishes, the creatures, and all of that coming towards you. That was definitely not possible with the previous one. We also did some prototyping with the water surface in the pool setup, because at that point, thanks to Zyval, I got the idea, wait a second, if we can trigger other systems with this, like having creatures come to you, how about spawning particles? So that's when we brought in like the water rings on the splashing. And yeah, we're probably gonna iterate on this idea further down the line, but at least for now, it's a nice addition we were not able to do previously. And the cool thing about this is still both systems are completely unindependent. So even if you update one or the other, you will not affect the previous version or break anything in the meantime. You can just swap them out and go about your life after that without having anything break previously. That's really nice.
Yeah, and the final point to mention is, as I mentioned previously when I was doing the tank, the touch tank, you get different responses out of the animals depending on how hard you hit the water. And this is enabled by this system giving you an estimate of the speed when you hit the object, which is how you can play. As you're all smacking it, you're probably mostly hearing the loud audio, but if you give it a gentle tap, you will just hear a gentle tap audio instead, if you set it up like that. I think, shall we move from contact-based to volume-based audio?
Yeah, exactly. There was another big thing we also did for the world. So having a nice visually pleasing world and having some interactions is obviously fun and all, but if you're going through the rooms, the outside area, and you're not hearing anything, this is, like put it, not really immersive. It's not like making you believe you're there. So one of the things we also worked on some of the previous MNCs around, which was also yet again Lotus Bay, was a so-called soundscape system. The way you set it up is actually pretty easy. You get this handy little tooltip, and you can go to the zone menu, add a new zone, and now you have this cube. This is your tracking space for your sound setup. So one thing we can do with this, for example, is let's just make it really big for testing purposes. And I think most of you should be in the zone.
Yeah, I think you got everyone.
Okay. So having a tracking space and all is really neat, but this one has another twist to it. You don't need an inspector to set up these sound effects. So if you bring up the menu again, you can now just click Add Sound Source, which gives you this small dandy speaker. And if you click it, it brings up this settings panel. And what this allows you now to do, if I would not deselect it, is if you got some sound clips, for example, in, let's see, in inventory ready. What some people tend to do is literally just bring up these sound clips and set them to broadcast. But that's not really a nice thing to go about things. So we can open up the menu again. Just grab the audio clip, put it in here. And as you can hear now, it's positional, but we now have these nice little sliders here. And let me turn down the volume just for safety reasons. We can now make it non-spatial, bring the blend back. And now we got like nice background wind in this area.
Which of course doesn't make much sense because we're indoors, but it doesn't matter. You can set up different zones around the world.
Exactly. And the neat thing about this is, yet again, there's no need to just have one big cube which might be intersecting with other parts of the map. So you can just bring up the menu again and add another box. And this allows you to set up multiple smaller rooms, do some uneven shapes and similar things. And you can just go between them, have multiple zones just really close to each other without any interference. And yet again, it makes it really easy to edit, just move them around. And if you're done with the basic setup, you can just go to toggle visibility and the system is set up, and you're good to go. Should we also talk about us play one-shots, Mars? Or
no?
Well, I think, fundamentally, the point is you can use it for looped audio clips, like long ambient ones like that, or you can also use it. So you set up this volume space, and you can just do like one-off audio clips as well. There's no requirement for it to be a long ambient thing. It can be used for sound effects too, basically.
Exactly. There's also some randomization. You can give it like different speeds in between delay times and similar things. So this makes it really easy to set up. And if you just want to reuse audio clips, you can just duplicate it, move it somewhere else, and you're also done.
Mm-hmm. I guess it might be worth it to explain why the system is needed for like spatial positional audio. Why not put a sound source everywhere? Why would you put those in the zones as well?
Yet again, technical limitations. So especially in Unity and other game engines, there's a certain amount of audio clips you can play at the same time. So, of course, you just don't want to have all the audio clips active at all places in the world, even if you can hear them. So they're constantly filling up your audio buffer in the background. So that's the reason why I want to set it up like that. That's one of the things you can do with the native audio players. And it also doesn't allow you to isolate the rooms from each other, which makes it really handy. Yet again to have, of course. The other problem with the default audio player is it's always on the same priority, which is 128 or so. And yet again, you can only have a certain amount of audio clips playing with the same priority at any given time. Some people might have seen that happen sometimes in worlds if people have a lot of sound effects on the avatars, that suddenly everything would go quiet for a few seconds and then come back again after the buffer have been cleared up. That's one of the reasons why I want something like that, because this completely avoids the issue.
Mostly.
Yeah, mostly. Of course, if you mess the settings up, you can still intentionally break everything, but...
Yeah, so the reason you want to use priority is that if there are too many audio clips playing, it knows which ones to prioritize, which ones to keep playing, and which ones to turn off. Otherwise, it just picks some at random.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. I think that was most of what we wanted to show. This was just a very small glimpse into some of the functionality in Deep Dreams. Of course, there are many other bits that we could have shown off today, like the smoother system made by Beamed over there in the audience. That's a lot of fun to play with. And in the future, hopefully, there are plans cooking in the background that some of the art team from Vibez as well will try to do, try to give their perspective on how the world was made, because it's very difficult to cover everything just from a functionality perspective. There's a huge amount that goes into the creation of the assets, planning things out, project management, that side of things as well. So keep your eyes open potentially for the art team to deliver their side of the story in the future too. I think that's everything we wanted to specifically say. So thanks very much for listening, everyone on stream as well.
So if anyone has any questions about what they just heard, or some things that they're curious about as far as this lovely, lovely world that we visited and we will visit again, does anyone have any questions? I'm looking at the Twitch stream too. On Twitch, I can see you. So if you have any questions on Twitch, to have those. The other, let me see if I can come up with one or two. So I know that your team, this is a little bit more on the project management side, but since you all are part of the project, did you encounter any issues with workflow, and how did you go through them? Like you had said, Zizzle, that you had to wait for certain things to happen, and you had placeholders and things like that. Were there any particular challenges, like working with a team that's kind of large? Because Vibez has, about 10 people in it, right, at any given point. Specifically as a large team, what kind of challenges did you encounter?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, so we're not just a large team. We're a team that works across at least 4 different time zones. Mars Electro and I are all in Europe. We've got a member or two in kind of Australian or Pacific time zones, and then people dotted around the States as well. So definitely coordinating between that, there's already a level of difficulty because, often when we're heading to bed, the people in the States are getting up. So that can be a little challenging, and it requires good communication about who is hosting the world, who is saving, when changes are being saved, that kind of thing. So we mostly use Discord to discuss that sort of thing. In the beginning, it can be a little tricky for the functionality people to know exactly what to work on, because until we get a bit more of an idea of how the world is going to look, sometimes picking projects for us to do can be a little tricky. And this is where, working with placeholders is incredibly important, and having people maybe with a bit more vision for the overall picture of the project. Rukio is fantastic at this, coming up with ideas. So this is where the ideas people really come in useful, is giving us ideas to work on while the world gets a bit more fleshed out for us to be able to put things in their final form. For example, the cannons that you can either shoot water balloons or people out of in the world were basically a product of this slight de-sync between programmers and modelers, because early on in the process, we had a reference picture of a kid playing with a water cannon, and I saw that and thought, yeah, we can make that. I don't have anything else that I'm specifically working on now. So Mars and I one evening just put together, I think it was just 2 cones, turned them into a swivel cannon. I decided we wanted projectiles, and then, the whole thing spiraled out from there. So sometimes, good things can actually come out of this gap as well. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
Do you want to add anything? Or is that pretty much cover it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess when working on this, the various meshes get replaced oftentimes as the world evolves and gets bigger, gets better. And some systems really rely on integrating with that mesh, getting like certain things hooked onto that mesh specifically. And I guess it's just difficult sometimes when you have to reset up the system 5 times, 10 times, because every time the world changes and becomes different.
That said, I have to say this year, getting the initial parts of the world blocked out was really, really fast. And that really helped, I think, a lot in pushing the productivity forward. So even if you don't have the final assets, just having enough of the geometry that everyone has a general sense of the space, I would strongly suggest any teams in the future heavily prioritize that. Even if you're blocking out with boxes, spheres, and capsules, just get the geometry there, get a sense of the space you're working with, and then you can start fleshing it out.
This is good advice, because we have some new people in the audience who are new Neosians. Welcome to all of you as well. But this is some great advice. Vibez is an excellent team that has won several different awards throughout the different MMCs. So yes, listen with avid ears about the advice about building, especially with these large, beautiful projects that they do. I have a question on Twitch, which is actually by Rukio.
This wasn't a plant, I promise.
This wasn't a plant, but I am going to just read his question off. How much of a mental drain would you say the project took from you? Was the time frame pressure the reason for it? I guess the reason for the mental drain? Or was it more figuring out how to get a system to work properly?
Good question. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the audio fade in, fade out?
And of course, the project manager is asking the question.
No. The audio. Well, yeah. So some systems don't always work great, and then one thing, for example, is the world has music, and it has, I think, 3-4 different songs playing throughout, depending on which area you are. And another nice thing is that when you are in the transition tunnel between the inside and the outside area, it plays the area you're closest to, but with a low pass filter, so it really sounds like it's behind the door, and the door is still closed. That was a lot of work to set up, just getting the entire state machine working, and then
having that nice blending between the different levels. We have something in the mid-range part, so as soon as the door starts opening, we slowly fading into the mid-range part. And at the point where it's fully open, then you actually get like the more positional part. You actually hear it coming around you as soon as you pass to the door. It was a lot of fine tuning.
It works nice. It sounds nice, but you don't want to look at the code behind it and why it functions the way it does.
Yeah, I think for me to the question, so Ricky was asking.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wouldn't say. In generally, I wouldn't say that solving the individual problems is too draining. I mean, we'll often have stuff we're doing during the day, so we can only find a few hours to do things at night, and that in and of itself can be a bit tiring. I was fortunate enough to be able to take some holiday towards the end, which gave me a bit more space to fill in the gaps and do some more polish. I would say solving the problems is not so much the draining bit. There's a fine balance in maintaining motivation and also keeping a realistic check on feature creep in the project and keeping track of which features we can realistically get done during the time and which we can't. And sometimes it can be a bit frustrating having to make decisions about features that you really like the idea of, and then maybe you've expended a decent amount of time into, and then you have to cut it because certainly my philosophy, and I think often the team will tend to agree with this, is it is better to present 50% of a world 100% done than to put everything you wanted in there but have it all half-baked. Because when people come into a world, they don't know what you wanted to put in there but weren't able to. So people just see the world as it is presented. So if the features which make it in feel reasonably polished, then that gives, in my opinion, a much better impression than throwing, the kitchen sink and it's all kind of a little bit broken, but you can see the ideas there.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's another piece of great advice for people who are looking to build in general and looking to build specifically as a time management for the MMC competition. Do we have any questions in the audience? It looks like we don't have one on Twitch at this point. Fur, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I'm raising my hand.
Please, good. It's hard to see from over here. Yes, you're.
I know. I'm very short. I'm sorry.
Well, it's just hard to see from this distance. Please, when you're asking questions and everything, put yourself in shout or broadcast for us so that the camera crew can pick you up. We really appreciate it. So go ahead with your question.
Hi. So I noticed that when you were saying, like, at the start, you got from like 0 to a very, very good proof of concept very quickly. Do you think that was mostly because you wanted to get something quick to show off, or it's because you knew that at some point you would be getting models? Like, how much of this is like, how much of your process is like done because you just want to get it done as quick as possible because it's a creator jam, or how much of it is because you want to get stuff done so you can get to the collaboration part quicker?
Yeah, no, I get it. Well, I think Hidi in the audience was one of the ones who really put in a huge amount of effort in the modeling earlier on in the period. My impression is that we didn't do it so much, because it's a project and we're feeling a lot of time pressure in the beginning. I think it's just that, when you start off the project, there's a big burst of motivation, which really helps to capitalize on. And I think we just had a lot of ideas early on. Hidi, I don't know if you want to contribute anything. He's nodding there in the background. And I think definitely several people on the team, like Rukio, was exploding with ideas early on. So I think it was more just that we had a lot we wanted to create and things crystallized relatively quickly. It can be really helpful if a few members of the team just take the initiative on the art side and say, right, this is how we're blocking things out, and other people can follow along, if that makes sense.
That actually follows one of the Twitch questions that we have. It's about the workflow that's used and what are any simplification tools you use.
Yeah, I mean, we have several.
Lots of boxes.
Oh yes, Rukio and his boxes. Everything's a box. Yes. A box is yes. He's all about the boxes. Yeah.
Exactly. Rukio got really quick at just prototyping out the general layout of a map, literally just using boxes and the already built-in tools for just quickly scaling and moving things around. And like I was saying, this also then helps really quickly the initial expressions to get out for what the art team can do, or just iterate on things. So also, yet again, what TD tended to do is, if an area was roughly sketched out and how it should be, we would actually export this whole hierarchy out as a model, bring it into Blender, and then model around the rough shape and bring in all the finer detail, and then backport the model again. This was one of the reasons why we were so really quick at iterating on ideas and just getting I guess in general, just a sense for, would this space work? Would the size of the rooms work? Does the layout make any sense?
Yeah, another thing which really improved the workflow towards the end, which is the phase where you're decorating things, you're filling the world out with props and decorations, is there is a tool which was made by a group which started in Neos called Mystic Forge, and they have a tool which can, if you're familiar with Unity development or other engines, it can create basically prefabs, which you can then spread a whole bunch of them around the world, and if you then realize that you want to update them, you can do it with a press of a button. And this comes in incredibly useful. For example, Chi loves doing this. Bean had a go at this as well during the last week or so of the thing when you're polishing things up, putting a bunch of foliage and everything around the world to make it feel more alive and full. So that was an enormous boost to our workflow. Plus, some easy drop in and out culling systems. You saw the context-based audio, which is easy to put in, the volume-based audio, which is easy to put in. So using these are all public tools, right? I believe
all of these are public. I think so.
Yeah, using all of these to try and accelerate the workflow and just as force multipliers to get more done in the time.
We have a bit of an explosion of questions on Twitch currently, but before we go to those, are there any more questions from the audience? If you could be, yes, over here. Please put yourself in broadcast. Thank you.
There's been quite a few concepts for other people when they come to creating ideas, and I understand that this was already answered. When you try to develop a new project, as you work your way through it, does your mind also get you to develop new ideas as you create your project, or does that come up before, like for a rough drafts kind of stage, and then the plan gets in motion of whether it's effective or not, or is it through the progress of working on your project?
Oh, we definitely progress. Definitely through the progress. Like I was already scratching a little bit on the surface there, the so-called feature creep. It was everywhere. Each and every time a new area was roughly sketched out, people were looking at things like, oh, this could be really nice. We could do things like this, the touch gang, we could put stuff in here, or the glass should make noise, and it just explodes, it spirals out of control. And that's also where, so I was saying, that's at some point where you sadly need to make the decision to somehow dim down the excitement on that. Sadly, this obviously can go both ways. So it's still an important thing to do. But it helps, and it's especially taking notes on the go. One of the things you definitely don't want to do if you're coming up with all of these great ideas is forgetting about them later. So it really helps on keeping notes and everything. Even if it doesn't make it into the current project, you could maybe add it later on an updated version of the same thing, or iterate on this idea on its own concept later down the line. So that's what I would say is also a really important step to do.
Oh yeah, so actually this reminds me of another organization tool that we use a lot, which is the Virtualis. Basically, it's a to-do board, right? I think it was originally made by a creator called Small Cookie, and it's really, really handy. You can put tasks, you can put in, in your agendas for different people, and we use this a lot. Just for getting ideas down out there, because sometimes a programmer or somebody or an artist has a bit of time, they're not really sure what they want to do, and just having a task board of ideas that you can immediately look at, think, oh, I can do that in an hour or two, fine, and then you take it off. So that's a big productivity booster in just surfacing ideas and making them available to people who may not be quite sure what they want to move on to next. That's definitely a big one. But yeah, we had a ton of ideas in the beginning. As you go through, as you design systems, you think more about them and ideas pop up. So I would say that ideas happen all along the process. And yeah, managing them is sometimes the harder part.
Yeah, definitely.
Knowing which ideas to strike out and tell, we're not going to do this one.
And this is something that comes with experience as well. Is as you know more about what can and can't be done in Neos, as you get a sense for how the systems work, then you become better at evaluating an idea and saying, yep, that's something that could feasibly be done in 2 or 3 days. Nope, that's going to take us a month. And trying to prioritize based on both what would be particularly appealing and also what is feasible.
NPCs.
Do we have other questions in the audience?
I have one more, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. Just make sure you're in broadcaster shout.
Sure. So I understand that for work times for different time zones is a factor in terms of that. When it comes to working on projects, some people tend to work on it for as long as maybe 2 hours. Others maybe work for 3 hours a day, approximately. What would be the approximate time for you, that you guys were able to do your projects for, approximately?
Oh,
that really varies
actually,
from day to day.
Yeah, that's a really tough one to answer.
Some days you are tired, you don't want to do anything, so you spend maybe an hour, maybe nothing that day. Other days you are very motivated and everyone is there in the world working on it, so you might spend the entire day pretty much working on the project. It definitely varies, and I had school in the meantime as well, so most days were a bit less time to work on it.
I imagine the closer it gets to the deadline, you guys must have to really crunch it, and then depending on the phase you're at in the project as well, right? Because if you're kind of done with your stuff and you have to pass it on,
the final hours are always stressful. Yes.
I love it though. I have to say, I really love the crunch time in the last few days. If I'm able to take time off and work on things full time, because it's everyone is in there in the world focused, laser focused on this one goal. You're probably feeling apprehension, anxiety, maybe not sleeping that well, but there's so much adrenaline. And as a team, we manage to avoid snapping at each other most of the time. We somehow managed to avoid unpleasant disagreements, and the stress acts more as a focuser than it does a panic inducer, which I don't know. I think we're lucky. For me, during the project, working full time, having a full time job, most weekdays, maybe I could do 2-3 hours if I was lucky and I had most things done. Weekends, I could spend a bit more time, but of course, there are things offline as well that you have to do. So, this is very much a hobby, I think, for the majority of people on the team, rather than it is, we're a small dev studio working on this full time. Yeah.
There are a couple of questions that I think we kind of covered on Twitch, but I'm just going to go through them. I think about 10 people are on your team at any given point, right?
Plus or minus,
The credits board shows 16, 17 in total.
Okay.
Roughly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that question is answered. So 16 to 17. You can check out the credits board in the world. Whoever had that question, random ICT. You can check out the credits board, find out who these people are, and count them up yourself. And we have one question, which was, what was the hardest thing to get to work? But I think you guys were talking about something in the sound system that was pretty hard to work, unless there was some other thing that was like the hardest thing for the project that
well, we can tell you about the hardest thing we didn't get to work.
The NPCs, well, they worked mostly, but go ahead.
So we had this really big grand idea of one of the many holy grails on this platform, which is having functional NPCs in a map. Still getting good performance, animations, all of that. We somehow got a prototype working. It was a little bit janky. Some of the animations would break up and things like that. But we did take a look at the prototype. It had all the basics covered we wanted, but then we did some calculations on how much stuff there is just on this one single NPC, and did summarize it higher and higher if we were gonna want to get more features in there. And it was just yet again spiraling out of control. Feature creep again. People seeing this NPC just walking around the desk, grabbing up the fruit, putting it into the blender, actually doing the smoothies for you if you tell him what a recipe you want to be covered, was really satisfying to see. But then, of course, people come in and be like, "Oh, how about this? How about this? How about this?" It's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And yet again, you go through the back of your mind, and you're like, "Yeah, it's you really want to do it, but it's just not gonna fit." And not
to mention your frame rate slowly but surely dropping, going
Exactly.
lower as you add more features to the NPC.
Exactly. The one biggest issue we had with the NPCs was performance. The more we added, the more inefficient became, because rapid prototyping has sadly the bad side effect of introducing way too much overhead. You want to have debug visuals so you see what this thing actually doing. You need to have some in-between quick tools just to really quickly iterate between the different states and all of that, and just adds on top of the whole pile. It was, in the end, was just not feasible. It's gonna return at some point, but not right now. It needs
maybe
way
in
more
a
time.
later version of the world, or in a later project.
Yeah. We didn't scrap the idea. It is definitely still alive and kicking somewhere in some prototype setup. I don't know. Spawning a prototype would probably be a really bad idea.
Don't do it now. Yeah.
But it's definitely gonna come back. We're gonna definitely iterate on this, and if everything goes up and well, you might even be able to have more than just a handful of these in the world, but no promises yet.
Well, I'm sure that you guys, you all, I should say, I'm sure that you all will get it to work at some point. Just from knowing this team for quite a few years at this point, the progress from the first few projects that I knew that you all were working on to the present day, every time you guys, you all work on a project and do one of these MMCs and do this, you raise the bar higher, and you raise the bar higher, I think, for everybody. Is there any more questions are there any more questions from our audience? Oh, we got one more question from Fur. Awesome, Fur. Okay, I think this will be the last question, and then after that, we'll wrap up. So go ahead.
So I've got a comment and a question. First off, and this is just me saying, the tools that you guys have been making for this, specifically like the audio tool, the waypoint tool. Like I used to work in game dev, and one of the biggest problems we had were internal tools were always like had a abhorrent user interface. So like other people couldn't use them without being trained, and you guys really solved that. The fact you could do the whole audio without having to open up an inspector, play with the underlying system is just fantastic. And to make sure you guys were aware that like that was not unnoticed. And then the question I have, and this is also because from my time doing like game dev, it's usually the programmers, it's usually the actual people that are trying to implement the systems that have to give the bad news that this isn't possible. Did you guys find that you were having to do that more than the other sides? Or are you at the point now where you kind of can make those decisions? And like, did you have to deal with any friction between people because of that?
I think there was a bit of disappointment, particularly for on the art side that we weren't going to be able to get the NPC. I mean, I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't going to happen, but I think, and at the time, I remember saying, no, I think we should try to push it out if we possibly can. But in retrospect, I was completely wrong, and this is one of the benefits of having the team there is you have enough points of view that generally we end up following the right route. Definitely there are instances where we have to say, look, no, this is not feasible. I think the art team as well sometimes will be able to come back to us and say, no, look, this feature, we don't have the time to model this. This is what we get. We're going to work with it. So let me put it this way. I have not noticed there being too much friction in the team. I know occasionally there is a bit of disappointment if one user has a particular feature that we want to get in. But on the whole, we are normally on the same page about at least the rough order of priority for features. I don't know, Bean and Hedy, you're in the audience. If you want to contradict me horribly, then go for it.
I don't really have a contradiction, but I think like after working on this is our like fourth time doing this, in the early years, like when we got to that crunch period, it was definitely stressful and there was some friction. But I think after working with each other for like so long, we kind of understand how everybody works, and it's much easier to like sort out things, I guess. So don't really have any issues at this point.
That's great.
Awesome.
So the
Thank
team
you.
works together, and even when there's disappointments, you come through and you make a fantastic world with lots of wonderful interactables and goodies and all sorts of things. So for those of you out in the Twitchosphere, if you haven't explored this world, you have to come in and do it. You can actually come and join us if you wish, because we are going to do a world hop after this. So I guess we're going to wrap up here. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to our Team Vibe speakers, Zizzle, Mars, and Electrospy. Also, I would like to give a shout out to our camera crew, which today is led by Carlos Austin, who brought that multicam Twitch stream to you today. And we also want to thank everyone in the auditorium and on Twitch for attending today and for your multiple wonderful questions that you had, some really thoughtful stuff. And I think this is one of our longer Neos Edu streams that we've had, just because the discussion was so good. So now we're going to close the stream. We're going to begin a world hop to further explore deep dreams. If you're on Twitch, feel free, and you have access to a headset, feel free to come on and join us. I'm Subjectivity. Just send me a friend request. And for the rest of you in our auditorium, we're going to begin a world hop and close out the stream. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening and sticking with us
Thank
for 2
you.
hours. Yeah. Thank you.
Good job, everyone.